My name is Kevin Schattenkirk. I am honors faculty in music, and my area of expertise is ethnomusicology and music history. The Stonewall Uprising itself was the result of queer people in New York City having enough of police harassment, and not even just police harassment, but a culture of queer phobia that was basically trickling down from the political arena in New York down into cultural and social arenas as well. Stonewall Inn, of course, was a gay establishment and was one of many private gay establishments in New York City at that time. And a lot of the reason why they were private was because there were laws on the books, particularly public displays of affection laws, where you could be arrested for holding somebody's hand walking down the street. And it wasn't even just in the public arena, but it was in private as well. Queer people were gravitating toward places like Stonewall or toward private house parties, for instance, where they could even feel safer. It was all about searching for a sense of community, a place where they could go and be themselves together. These establishments were regularly raided by the police. To complicate matters, a lot of these establishments were also owned by the mafia. So, with a vested interest in protecting their establishments, there would be people within the police departments that would make money from the mafia by tipping off staff at establishments like Stonewall, calling up and saying, hey, there's about to be a police raid. Everybody in Stonewall would sort of get themselves in order. Alcohol would be put away. People wouldn't touch, wouldn't dance together, all to sort of maintain a sense of propriety. Well, nobody at the Stonewall Inn was tipped off on June 28th of 1969. So nobody knew that there was an impending police raid. And it took patrons by surprise, of course, and people had just had enough at that point and fought back against the police. Based on the evidence that exists, it would seem to suggest that at that point in time, it was just a confluence of events. And it was just a moment of combustion, really, where everything just kind of fell into place. So the riot lasted not just one day, but 2 days. And it began in the early hours of June 28th. And what happened initially was that the conflict kind of spilled out into the streets, and all of a sudden there is a mass of queer people who were not necessarily all patronizing Stonewall, but saw what was going on, and almost as if there was this kind of community reaction to what was going on. We don't know who exactly and where exactly it started, but we do know that it happened in a few different places. Then the revolt itself got so intense that it pushed a lot of police officers into the Stonewall Inn, where they were trapped in there while all of this is going on. So the intensity of the uprising seemed to take hold pretty quickly, and it lasted for 2 days. So among the people who participated in the Stonewall Uprising, there were two people over the last 10 to 15 years that have rightfully gained a lot more recognition for their role in advancing acceptance of queer people in New York City at that time, Marsha P. and Sylvia Rivera. The impact that both of them had was profound enough to where we see their stories coming about now as having played pivotal roles in the revolt. against the police, they would have been more likely to have been sort of lumped in with drag queens, right? People who were performing, people who identified as maybe cisgender and male, but performing in drag, where maybe in current day and age, they may not have identified as such. They may have identified as trans. So as a result, they've been held up as some of the pivotal transgender figures in the movement. And we're starting to see that visibility in a way that I think is drawing attention to how the story of Stonewall has been whitewashed in a lot of ways, and how the story of Stonewall has been presented predominantly as cisgender and gay, when it was a big group of people, vast group of people who responded in this sort of intense moment of, again, combustion. The aftermath of the Stonewall Uprising led almost immediately to the birth of the modern Pride movement. A year later, on June 28th of 1970, we start to see some of the first Pride marches in the US take place in New York City, of course, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And that really gave rise to what we now refer to as Pride, and the regular occurrence of these parades, not just in those cities, but springing up in other cities as well, really giving visibility to the queer experience throughout the nation. I see Stonewall as having had a significant impact on us today for a number of reasons. Not even 10 years later, we get the election of Harvey Milk in San Francisco, one of the first openly gay politicians to serve in government. But then we get to the 1980s, and there's a big regression with the AIDS epidemic, the ways in which AIDS was stigmatized as a gay disease, even though science was proving that you didn't have to be queer to contract HIV and die from AIDS. But then at the beginning of the 90s, we see the election of Bill Clinton, who promised to be an ally. But we've seen this kind of trajectory from Stonewall up to the present moment where things for the queer community have kind of ebbed and flowed. There has been progress and there have been setbacks. In a lot of ways, some of the things we're contending with now, as similar as they are to Stonewall, the context is different. And we're working in a context now where there is greater political acceptance of the queer community. There's greater social acceptance of the queer community, and we're seeing more visibility in the cultural sphere, in television, music, films, and so on. With Stonewall, I see that as being a really pivotal moment for change, something that we can go back and look at now and learn from what the people who participated in that, what they did, and going, tracing that up to the present moment to learn lessons from the people who paved the way to now. Pride really started with Stonewall, and that's often how people will refer to that particular event as the first Pride, even though the first Pride marches happened a year later, but it was really the uprising itself that gave birth to that. So who knows if Pride marches would have even begun without Stonewall. A lesson we can take from Stonewall is listening to one another and really getting a sense of what it is that people in the community want and value, and taking each other into consideration rather than focusing on how the rest of the world perceives us and what is best going to fulfill our needs.